You have been brazenly lied to about the salvation of Europe. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 is not a great victory for Christianity, but the greatest fabrication in history. How is it that immediately after the triumph, the Habsburgs are urgently seeking others to fight in their place? Why was the Holy League created from states that are worthless on their own? And why does Russia, which had lived in peace with the South for almost 100 years, suddenly commit to starting a war at Europe's first demand? You are told of heroic defense to conceal the fact of a global defeat. History has been rewritten, but stone and metal remember the truth. The main question is, what price did Russia pay to uphold this European lie? The Battle of Vienna in 1683. The Habsburgs defeated the Ottomans. They saved Europe from the Turkish threat, a turning point in history. But open the engravings of that era, and you will see crescents on the domes of Viennese cathedrals. Take the engravings of Vienna from the 1680s. Look at the domes of the main cathedrals. What do you see? Crescents with a star. Islamic symbolism. In the center of the capital of the Christian Habsburg Empire, in the heart of the very city that was supposedly reclaimed from the Turks. If the Habsburgs won, why are there symbols of Islam in their temples? Victors do not adorn their places of worship with the emblems of the vanquished. This is not logic. It is a contradiction. The most obvious explanation is architectural fashion, Orientalism. European aristocrats loved exoticism. But then, why do these symbols appear specifically after the Battle of Vienna? Until 1683, the churches in Vienna were crowned with crosses. After that, with crescents. Look at the coins from that time. Austrian thalers from 1684 to 1686. Many of them feature a crescent on the reverse side. This is not just a decorative element. In the 17th century, the symbolism on coins and buildings was a political statement. The cross represents Christian power. The crescent represents Islam. The double-headed eagle symbolizes the empire. If there is a crescent on the cathedral, it means that the cathedral acknowledges Islamic authority. The Habsburgs did not defeat the Turks. They lost, and quickly began to rewrite this history. They created the legend of the heroic defense of Vienna. But visual evidence remains. Engravings, coins, architectural details. Those that they didn't manage to alter or erase. But how to conceal such a significant defeat? How to make the world believe the opposite? For this, an operation is needed. A series of diplomatic maneuvers. And it begins in the year 1684. 1684. The Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire had a peace treaty. The Warsaw Treaty of 1604. 80 years of relative peace. Borders are stable. Trade is flourishing. Conflicts occurred, but there were no major wars. Open the chronology of the Habsburg Wars with the Ottoman Empire. From 1604 to 1684, almost complete tranquility. 80 years. The treaty worked. Both sides adhered to the conditions. In the year 1684, the treaty is set to expire. According to diplomatic protocol, both parties must meet and extend the agreement. But the Turks refuse. They do not want to extend the 80-year peace. Why? At first glance, it seems that the Ottomans became aggressive and decided to expand their territories, to conquer Europe. And this sounds logical. until you look at what the Habsburgs are doing in the same year. In 1684, the Pope created the Holy League, a military alliance against the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburgs, Poland, and Venice. The official goal was to repel the Turkish threat. However, note the date. The Holy League was established in the same year that the Turks refused to extend the treaty. Not a year later, not 2 years later, in that very 1684. Coincidence? Or a reaction? The Turks see that the Habsburgs are weak after their defeat at Vienna. They refuse to extend the treaty. The Habsburgs urgently create a military alliance. They search for allies, because they cannot fight the Ottomans alone. Look at the members of the Holy League. The Habsburgs have just lost near Vienna. Poland is in a state of internal chaos after wars with Sweden and Russia. Venice is a trading republic with an army on paper that is larger than in reality. This is not an alliance of strength. It is a union of weakness. 3 states that individually can do nothing against the Ottomans. But the Sacred League is not a solution to the problem. It is an attempt to find those who will fight instead of the Habsburgs, or for them. And in 2 years, they find the perfect candidate. The year 1686. Russia and Poland sign the Eternal Peace, the end of a long-standing war. Officially, a great diplomatic achievement. Peace between 2 Slavic states. Stabilization of Eastern Europe. Read the text of the contract. Specifically, Article 5. Russia commits to sever peaceful relations with the Crimean Khanate. It pledges to commence military actions against Crimea. It cannot. It will not consider the possibility. It pledges. This is a direct obligation stated in the peace treaty. The Crimean Khanate is a vassal of the Ottoman Empire. A war with Crimea automatically means a war with the Turks. By signing the Eternal Peace with Poland, Russia simultaneously becomes part of the Holy League against the Ottomans. And this is clearly stated in the treaty, which is called a peace agreement. Historians usually say, Crimea constantly raided Russian lands, taking thousands of people into slavery, and it needed to be stopped. Okay, let's assume that's true. Then explain. Why did Russia endure these raids for 100 years, only deciding to go to war 2 years after the formation of the Holy League? Why does the peace treaty with Poland include an obligation to fight against Crimea? Look at the dates. 1684, the Holy League is formed. 1686, the Eternal Peace is signed. 1687, Russia begins the war with Crimea. From the formation of the League to the start of the war, 3 years. 2 years were spent on diplomacy, a year on preparation. This is not a coincidence. This is a chain. 17th century diplomacy is a meticulous craft. Treaties are negotiated over the course of years. Ambassadors travel between capitals. Drafts, revisions, disputes over every phrase, ratifications. Peace negotiations between Poland and Russia have been ongoing since 1683. The war ended in 1681. 2 years, just for preliminary negotiations. Where to meet? Who will conduct the negotiations? What status the ambassadors will hold? Another year for the formulation of conditions, boundaries, territories, compensations, guarantees. Every word is vetted by lawyers. Each phrase is approved by the Boyar Council in Moscow and the same in Warsaw. And here lies the paradox. The most contentious point of the agreement, the obligation to fight against Crimea, passes without discussion, without disputes, as if both sides had agreed in advance, as if this condition had been arranged somewhere else. Prior to the official negotiations, Sofia Alexeyevna signs the eternal peace. Does she realize it's a trap? Most likely, yes. Vasily Golitsyn is her chief advisor and favorite, a man who speaks Latin better than Church Slavonic. He understands European diplomacy. He sees the game of the Habsburgs. He realizes that Russia is being drawn into someone else's war. But to abandon the treaty means to be left without allies. Poland to the west, Sweden to the north, Crimea to the south. Russia is surrounded. The eternal peace provides a respite with Poland. In return, Russia is obliged to fight for the interests of the Holy League, for the interests of those who lost to the Turks but rewrote it as a victory. Eternal peace is not peace. It is a contract. Russia gains stability in the West. In return, Russia becomes a military tool for Europe against the Ottomans. And in a year, Russia fulfills the contract. 1687. The first campaign in Crimea, commanded by Vasily Golitsyn. The army consists of 100,000 men. This is more than that of the Swedish king Charles XII at Poltava, more than that of Napoleon in his early Italian campaigns. A huge army by the standards of the 17th century. Calculate the logistics. 100,000 people. Each person needs at least 2 kilograms of food per day. That's 200 tons of food daily. Now add 120,000 carts and wagons. Each wagon carries supplies, weapons, tents. Now add 200,000 horses. Each horse needs at least 10 kilograms of feed per day. That's 2,000 tons of hay and oats daily. The roads of the 17th century are dirt tracks. In dry weather, they turn to dust. In rain, they become swamps. The speed of a convoy is a maximum of 20 kilometers a day. From Moscow to Crimea, it's 1,200 kilometers. That's at least 60 days of travel, plus stops for rest, plus illnesses, plus bad weather. Realistically, 3 months. 120,000 wagons lined up in a column stretch over almost 400 kilometers. If the front of the column has reached Crimea, the tail is still standing near Moscow. Managing such a behemoth is physically impossible. Communication between the front and the back takes days. Orders arrive with delays. Coordination of actions is on the verge of fantasy. Now let's count the water. 100,000 people in the steppe during the summer. Each needs a minimum of 3 liters of water per day to avoid dehydration. That's 300 tons of water daily, plus 200,000 horses. Each needs at least 30 liters a day. That's an additional 6,000 tons. In total, that's 6,300 tons of water every day. Where to get it in the steppe? Dig wells at every camp? A 10-meter deep well takes 3 days to dig. To supply an army of 100,000 with water, at least 50 wells are needed at each camp. That's 150 person days of work. The army stays for 3 days while they dig for water. The journey takes 3 months, 90 days. That means 30 camps. Thus, it requires 4,500 person days just for water. The steppe is not a forest. There are no rivers every 10 kilometers. There are no streams. Water can be found in rare wells, which are already occupied by local nomads. Or it may not exist at all. In summer, the steppe rivers dry up. Only lakes with salty water remain. It cannot be drunk. The outcome of the campaign? No major battles. They never reached Crimea. The army turned back. The official reasons: steppe fires, lack of water, diseases. But Golitsyn is an experienced voivode. He knows that you can't lead an army of 100,000 into the steppe in summer without guaranteed water supply. He has served on the southern borders. He understands the logistics of steppe campaigns. And yet he still takes a huge army into a clearly doomed operation. 1689. The Second Crimean Campaign. Golitsyn is in command again. The army, again 100,000 strong. The route, the same. The logistics, the same. The result, the same. No major battles. They did not reach Crimea. Many will write now, Golitsyn was a poor commander. He miscalculated his forces. He failed in his mission. Fine. Then explain, why did he lead the same army along the same route a second time and face the same failure? Once, a mistake. Twice in a row, a pattern. 2 expeditions, the same number of troops. The same route, the same outcome. This is not incompetence. It is a deliberate action. Golitsyn in the 17th century is no novice in military affairs. He participated in the war with Poland. He besieged fortresses. He led diplomatic missions. He knows logistics. He understands that an army of 100,000 men with such a supply train cannot reach Crimea via the steppe roads. And yet he leads it. Twice. Look closely at his actions. He is formally adhering to the agreement. Yes, we made a move. Yes, we moved south. Yes, we tried to reach Crimea. For Europe, the report sounds convincing. Russia is fulfilling the obligations of the eternal peace, waging war against the Turkish vassal. In fact, not a single real battle with the Crimean Tatars. Not a single siege of fortresses. Not a single captured city. The Crimean Khanate remains untouched. Connections between Crimea and Russia are maintained. Golitsyn is sabotaging the war. Sofia, through him, is showing Europe, yes, we signed the contract, but we will not actually fight. We are formally complying. In reality, we preserve the status quo. But who is Golitsyn? Why is he capable of such a game? Vasily Vasilievich Golitsyn, a boyar, the favorite of Sofia, and a man who spoke Latin better than many European diplomats. Read the memoirs of ambassadors who visited Moscow. The Danish envoy writes in his report, "I thought I was at the court of an Italian prince, not in the Moscow palaces." The conversation was conducted in Latin. They discussed the philosophy of Descartes and the political structure of republics. This is not an exaggeration. Golitsyn was proficient in Latin at the level of a graduate of a European university. Where does the Moscow boyar have such an education from? In Russia in the 1670s, Latin is taught only at the Slavic Greek Latin Academy. But the academy opened in 1687. By that time, Golitsyn was already conversing fluently with ambassadors in Latin. This means he must have studied somewhere else. Where? There is no answer. Look at his library. The inventory of Golitsyn's possessions after his exile. Among the books are the works of Hugo Grotius in Latin, treatises on natural law, treatises on the political structure of Venice and Holland. This is not light reading. This is political philosophy. These are texts studied in European universities. The Swedish diplomat notes, Prince Golitsyn asked me about the structure of the Riksdag, the role of the estates in decision-making, and the voting procedures. He was interested in how the system of checks and balances works. Why can the parliament limit the king? What mechanisms prevent the monarch from usurping all power? This is not a trivial interest. This is the study of technology. 1688. Golitsyn is conversing with a European ambassador about events in England, about the Glorious Revolution, about how Prince William of Orange landed with troops in England, overthrew King James II, ascended the throne, and hardly spilled any blood. Golitsyn is not merely curious. He asks detailed questions. How was the landing organized? How was parliamentary support secured? How was the king's army neutralized? He studies not war. He studies the technology of regime change. In 9 years, Peter the Great will travel to Europe, the Great Embassy. And one of the main points on the agenda will be a visit to none other than William of Orange. Peter will learn from the man who carried out the perfect coup. And a year after his return, Peter will apply the same technology. Mass executions of the Streltsy, the eradication of the old boyar elite, the relocation of the capital to a new city without roots and memory. Golitsyn studied the method. Peter implemented it. Golitsyn is not just a Moscow boyar. He is an agent of European influence. But he serves 2 masters simultaneously. Sophia, who wants to maintain independence from Europe, and the European courts, which seek control over Russia. He balances between them. The failures of the Crimean campaigns are his way of preventing Europe from having full control, to formally fulfill the contract while effectively sabotaging the outcome. But such a game cannot last forever. 1689. Sophia is overthrown. Peter comes to power. Golitsyn is exiled, not just to the province, to Pustozersk, beyond the Arctic Circle, to a place where dissenters perish from cold and hunger, where there are no roads and no communication with the outside world. A European who spoke Latin, a man who discussed political philosophy with ambassadors, a nobleman studying the technologies of power transition. He will spend the rest of his life in an icy desert. His possessions have been confiscated. His noble title has been revoked. His family is ruined. Peter removes those who knew too much, those who witnessed the game of Europe, those who could tell the truth. And 6 years later, Peter begins his war with the Turks. 1695. The Azov campaigns. The target? The fortress of Azov at the mouth of the Don. A Turkish fortress controlling the exit to the Sea of Azov. Compare the figures. Golitsyn led 100,000 men. 2 campaigns, 0 results. Peter leads 30,000 in the first campaign, 40,000 in the second. Azov was taken in 1696. Golitsyn, with an army 3 times larger, could not cross the steppes. Peter, with an army 3 times smaller, takes an entrenched fortress by the river. From a logistics standpoint, this is impossible. If Golitsyn couldn't manage it, Peter certainly shouldn't have been able to. In school, we were taught Peter was a brilliant commander, a reformer, an innovator. Golitsyn was a conservative and a failure. All right. Then why did Peter lose at Narva 4 years later? Why did it take 21 years of war with Sweden to achieve victory? Where is the brilliance? The difference is not in talent. The difference is in purpose. Golitsyn did not want to take Crimea. He sabotaged the campaigns. Peter wanted to seize Azov. He fulfilled the contract. The contract of the Holy League, which Sophia tried to bypass. Azov is not a strategic goal for Russia. The fortress at the river's mouth does not provide control over the sea. The Turkish fleet is still stronger. Trade routes are still under Ottoman control. Azov is a symbol. It is a gesture towards Europe. Look at the siege itself. In the first campaign of 1695, Peter suffers a defeat. The fortress is not captured. The Turkish fleet supplies the garrison by sea. Peter retreats. And what does he do? He builds a fleet. During the winter of 1695 to 1696, 23 galleys are constructed at the Voronezh shipyards. 4 fireships, 2 galleys for counterattacks, 1,300 boats for troop transport. Where did they get the masters? From Holland. Who designed the ships? Dutch engineers. Who oversaw the construction? Europeans. Peter is not building the Russian Navy. He is ordering a European fleet at Russian shipyards. The second campaign, 1996. The fleet blocks the fortress from the sea. The garrison is cut off from supplies. The fortress surrenders. Azov is captured, not by Peter's genius, but by European technologies and European craftsmen. Golitsyn couldn't do this. He didn't have permission to hire Europeans. Sofia did not allow Europe such control over military operations. Peter does. That's why Peter wins where Golitsyn lost. Proof that Russia is now truly at war. That Russia is fulfilling its commitments. That instead of Sofia, who sabotaged, Peter has come, who carries out orders. After the capture of Azov, Peter travels to Europe, the Great Embassy of 1697. He is received as a hero, as one who has proven his loyalty, as one who fulfilled the promise made by the Eternal Peace 11 years ago. The Azov campaigns are not the beginning of Peter's reforms. They are the completion of a deal. Russia showed Europe, now we fulfill the contract. Sofia was unwilling. Peter agreed. That is why Sofia was removed. That is why Peter is in power. But why was Sofia so persistently opposed to the war with Crimea? What was so important about maintaining peace with the Khanate? Why was she willing to risk her power by sabotaging the obligations of the Holy League? The solution lies in understanding who Crimea truly was. The Crimean Khanate. Open the European maps of the 16th century. The Crimean Peninsula and the steppe regions of the Black Sea. Thousands of kilometers of trade routes. Steppes, mountains, coastlines. And an inscription. The southern part of Great Tartary. Crimea, not as a separate state, as a part of a vast system that extended from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean. Open the maps of the 17th century. Tartary has vanished from the maps. In its place are scattered khanates, principalities, and nomadic hordes. The system is shattered. Connections have been severed. Only Crimea remains, the last fragment of what existed before the catastrophe. Crimea is not just a steppe khanate making raids. It is a link between the East and the West. Trade routes, cultural connections, a memory of the world that existed before the 17th century, before the arrival of new dynasties, before the Romanovs in Russia, before the Habsburgs in Europe, before the Ottomans in Turkey. Look at the maps of trade routes from the 15th to 16th centuries. The Great Silk Road runs through Central Asia, the Caspian Sea, and Crimea. It leads to the Black Sea. From there, it goes into Europe. Crimea is a transit hub. It controls trade between Asia and Europe. Now look at the maps of the 17th century. The Silk Road has been redirected. It goes through the Ottoman Empire, across the Mediterranean Sea. Crimea is bypassed. Why? Because the old connections with Tartary have been severed. Because trade is now under the control of the Ottomans and Europeans. The war with Crimea is not a struggle for security. It is the final destruction of old trade routes. The severing of the last ties between Russia and the southern lands that remembered Tartary. Sophia defended Crimea not because she feared the Turks. She defended the last ties to the old world, to what was before the catastrophe, to the memory of the system that had been erased from the maps, but which still lived on in the south. Someone might object. Crimea conducted raids, took Russians into slavery, burned villages. Yes, it did. But look at the timeline. Russia and Crimea coexisted for 150 years. From the fall of Kazan in 1552 until the eternal peace of 1686. 134 years. Raids occurred, conflicts happened, but there was no full-scale war. Both sides coexisted. They traded. They exchanged embassies. Why did war suddenly become necessary in the year 1687? Why at this moment did Crimea transform from a neighbor into a deadly enemy? Because the Holy League demanded it. Because the Habsburgs, who had lost to the Turks, needed Russia to fight in the south. It diverted Ottoman forces. It gave Europe a respite. Europe needed to cut Russia off from its last ties to what remained of the old world. To sever trade routes through Crimea. To erase the memory of Tartary. To transform Russia into an isolated state, entirely dependent on European alliances. Look at other regions. The Ottoman Empire is a remnant of the old system in the south and east. The Habsburgs are at war with it, but cannot achieve victory. China. The Ming dynasty fell in 1644. The Manchus seized power and began rewriting history. Japan. They closed the country under the Tokugawa shogunate, isolating it from the outside world for 250 years. Everywhere it's the same. The old world is crumbling. New dynasties are coming to power. Ties to the past are severed. Memory is erased. History is being rewritten. Look at the synchrony. 1604, the Warsaw Treaty between the Habsburgs and the Ottomans. 80 years of peace. 1683, the Battle of Vienna. 1684, the Turks refused to extend the treaty. In the same year, the Pope creates the Holy League. 1686, the eternal peace between Poland and Russia. 1687, Russia begins a war with Crimea. 3 years, a chain of diplomatic maneuvers, from the defeat of the Habsburgs to Russia's involvement in the war, too swift, too synchronized. The war with Crimea is not a struggle for the security of the southern borders. It is the final step in erasing the memory of what existed before the 17th century, before the arrival of the Romanovs, before the catastrophe that buried cities in dirt and wiped empires off the map. Sophia understood this. She tried to maintain connections. She sabotaged military campaigns. She didn't allow Europe to use Russia as a military tool. But she was removed. They put Peter in place, who was willing to fulfill the contract. Remember the beginning. Crescents at the Viennese assemblies. The Habsburgs lost the war to the Turks. They rewrote the defeat as a great victory. They created the Holy League. They drew in Poland and Venice. They lured Russia through the eternal peace. Russia is obliged to fight against Crimea. Sophia sabotages. Peter acts. This is a pattern. Russia fights for the interests of others, for those who lost, but rewrote history as a victory. From the Crimean campaigns of 1687 until... How many times will this mechanism repeat? How many times will Russia be drawn into wars that began with the defeats of others? Open maps of Europe before and after the Azov campaigns. Look at who controlled the trade routes across the Black Sea. See where the borders of the Crimean Khanate disappeared after the wars of the 18th century. Check where Tartary was mentioned on old maps, and ask the question, who benefited from Russia severing its last ties with the South? Who gained from Sophia being removed while Peter was kept? Crescents on the towers of Vienna. Symbols of defeat that were attempted to be erased. They created a legend of victory. They initiated a chain of diplomatic maneuvers, and Russia became an instrument in this game. Sophia tried to resist. For that, she was removed. Golitsyn knew too much. For that, he was exiled. The Streltsy remembered the old ways. For that, they were executed in 1698. 1698. The Streltsy Uprising. Peter is in Europe. The Streltsy demand the return of Sophia to power. The rebellion is suppressed. Peter returns, and the executions begin. 2,000 people. Hanged, beheaded, quartered. Executions lasting for several months. This is not the suppression of a rebellion. This is the annihilation of memory. The Streltsy are the last army that remembered the times before the Romanovs, which served under the first czars of the dynasty, which witnessed the changes in power, which knew the old order. Look at the methods of execution. Peter personally participates in the executions. He personally beheads people. He compels the nobles to take part. This is not revenge. This is a ritual, a symbolic destruction of the old world. Each execution is a message. Everything that was before me is erased. After the executions, the Streltsy army was disbanded. It was replaced by a regular army based on European models. The officers were foreigners. Training was conducted according to Dutch and German regulations. The uniform was European. The command language was German. The old army has been destroyed. A new army has been created. And this new army remembers nothing of what was before Peter. Peter completed the cleansing. He obliterated memory. He moved the capital to a city without a past. He built an empire based on European models. He fulfilled the contract that began with crescents on the Viennese cathedrals. But the question remains, why was Russia so easily drawn into someone else's war? Why was Sophia unable to resist? Why did Europe know that Russia would sign the eternal peace and start a war with Crimea? Because Russia, after the catastrophe of the 17th century, was weak. A new dynasty, devastated lands, cities buried in mud, a population that had lost its memory. In such a situation, Any external alliances seemed like salvation. Any peace treaty was a blessing. Europe has seen this. Europe has used this. The Pope served as the organizing center. It was he who gathered the members of the League. It was he who guaranteed the funding. It was his diplomats who traveled between capitals, building a chain of agreements. The eternal peace was signed not for the sake of peace. It was signed to bind Russia with obligations. The Crimean campaigns were initiated not for security. They were initiated to sever the last ties with the old world. And the pattern still works today. Look at the history of Russia's wars. How many of them were fought for foreign interests? How many started with allied obligations? How many times did Russia fight on the side of those who ultimately lost, but rewrote it as a victory? The story you know is incomplete. Victories have been rewritten. Defeats are hidden. Treaties are classified. But visual evidence remains. Engravings, coins, maps. Dates that are too synchronized to be a coincidence. Find engravings of Vienna from the 1680s. The crescent moons on the domes are in the archives. Austrian thalers with Islamic symbolism are sold at auctions. 16th century maps featuring Tartary have been digitized and are available online. Read the text of the Eternal Peace of 1686. Article 5, regarding the obligation to fight against Crimea, is clearly written. The treaty is not hidden. It is publicly available. Check for yourself. Calculate the time between the events. From the Turks' refusal to extend the Warsaw Pact to the creation of the Holy League, months. From the creation of the League to the eternal peace, 2 years. From the eternal peace to the war, 1 year. This is not a drawn-out story. This is a swift operation. Compare the maps of trade routes. In the 16th century, the Great Silk Road passes through Crimea. In the 18th century, the route is diverted, going around through Ottoman lands. Crimea is excluded from trade, isolated, devalued. Compare with Peter's Azov campaigns. 30,000 people. The fleet built in a winter. European craftsmen, Dutch engineers. Azov is taken because Peter gives Europe control. Sofia did not. Therefore, Sofia is removed. These are not conjectures. These are dates, numbers, logistics, visual evidence, the synchronicity of events, a pattern that repeats. Look at them for yourself. Check the timeline. Compare the events. Calculate the likelihood of random coincidences. And decide, is this just history? Or is it an operation stretched over years that has turned Russia into a military tool for executing others' defeats? Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell. Share the video with those who are ready to look beyond the official version. Many investigations lie ahead. We will continue to seek evidence of how history was rewritten, how the memory of the old world was erased, how new dynasties built their power on the ruins of what existed before the 17th century. The following investigation is about where the technologies of the past have gone, about buildings that could not be constructed in the 18th century, about blueprints that emerged before their inventions, about systems that operated without the sources of energy we know. Truth does not lie on the surface. It is hidden in the details. in dates that are too synchronous, in numbers that do not add up, in visual evidence that contradicts the official version. Look wider. Check for yourself. Count. Compare. Look for discrepancies, and the truth will not be revealed through textbooks. It will emerge from engravings, coins, maps, logistical calculations, which all say one thing: history is not as it is portrayed.